Hey guys, alright, just before the show starts, I wanted to let you guys know that my fight against cancel culture is still happening. Please go to the description below. There's a link titled Support My Fight Against Cancel Culture. If you want to help my fight, please consider giving a bit of a donation. All the information's in that link. With that being said, enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Let's Talk. I am sitting here tonight with the Dodgy Idealist. At the beginning of the show, as you guys went on, I was mid puff. So it's going to be an interesting topic tonight. I think some of the woke might get a hernia, and that's fine. It's what my channel's all about. I, once again, sitting here with the Dodgy Idealist, and I have left a link to his Twitter account and his YouTube channel. He has a podcast. Please go check it out. I was recently on that show, and it was very fun. Me and Moo, I believe, was the other individual. All these code words and stuff. The right-wing cabal is full of them. So that's a joke. Calm down, people. All right. So the Dodgy
Is it
Idealist.
Joe? Is it really?
I'm going to call you Dodgy. All right. I'm just going to call you Dodgy for
That's
short. I'm not
fine.
going to say Dodgy
Yeah.
Idealist every time. So Dodgy. Just talk about, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you can and what you're willing to divulge, and also tell us a bit about the podcast.
Right. As Joe already mentioned, I am the Dodgy Idealist, and it's there for a reason like that, because for some I am dodgy, for others I am an idealist. So I thought, well, I'll combine the two names. Um, there's a bit more history to that, but I don't think there's enough time to actually discuss that.
Right.
The podcast really I share with Moo Raider from the Cows of Chaos. You're part of that group as well, and the right wing cabal that sort of the week yeah. So
The Illuminati, yes, yes,
yes. So it was really her idea, and I thought, well, yeah, let's go for it. Yes, like stop it, you're going to make it.
yeah, I know. No, they'll
you know
they'll find this video and they'll be like, "See what happened? See, they
yes,
don't they don't
it's
even
like,
hide it
yeah, see the
anymore."
right wing. Yeah, but there already. Put some symbols over, and we're good to go.
He's even got the American
So yeah,
flag. I
the
told you.
pot. Yeah, it's part of them. It's the part of the like the what do they call them? The Freemasons.
Yes, yes.
Good. It's awesome. So, so yeah, the podcast really concentrates on interesting individuals that she and I would find interesting and want to interview and talk to and stuff. But I've been quite busy lately, so it's been on the back burner. But hopefully next week we'll talk to Dee Martin if she wants
Oh,
to.
cool.
I still need to extend an invite to her, so it might not happen. It might happen. So we'll see how it plays out. If not, there are others as well that we'll approach. Um, I also do try to delve into a bit of symbolism in art. Uh, One of our mutual friends actually like put an art piece there and said, "Interpret this," and it was like, it's too late for this, and I'm too sober for that. So, yeah. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, not really much other than that to tell actually.
All right. Um, so we have Robin Dandelion who's I believe tuned in saying good evening. Thank you, Robin, so much for tuning in. All right, so let's get right into the main topic at hand. I think sensitive topic for some people. Yanni's just joined us as well, saying hello, peeps. Hello, Yanni. Thank you for tuning in, buddy. All right, so this we're going to talk about white privilege, everyone. And I don't honestly I don't know where to start with this topic, but what I do know is that recently you took it upon yourself to do some research on the topic, and you contacted the Queen of Woke, and she then told you, try starting off with this stuff. So, um, Tell us about that. Where are you now, and what have you learned? Yeah.
Well, I'm going to try and be as neutral as possible when I explain their points, uh, but that's going to be a very difficult task. I've already gone through like, three double shots whiskey just to make sure I'm ready for this because you can't handle this shit sober. Sorry for swearing, but that's honest. That's being honest.
Yeah.
So I contacted her after her little, spat with Ronaldo and stuff because that really irritated me. Because for me, when you're going to say to people, we're going to have a discussion on something, I expect you to have that discussion, right? Don't try and, how can I say, drag the other person through the mud before you try and make your point, right? I don't agree with white privilege at all. And I thought, well, before I start tackling this whole issue, let me try and understand their thought process in this. Like, what is it? Where are they arguing from? Because it's good and fine to listen to other YouTubers and read articles on this on how it's bullshit. But if you don't understand why, then you're not really equipped to like tackle the ideas head on. So from what I can see from this book that I'm currently reading, yeah, she gave me three books, but I decided that no, I'm not going to start with those because it doesn't really introduce me to the idea of white privilege. So I found this book, Seeing White: An Introduction to White Privilege and Race, which to some of were also a really good starting point. So I said, okay, let me try there. Let me start there and see where they're coming from. Now, their idea rests a lot on a redefinition of racism, right? So they have to redefine racism. So they define it as power plus privilege, power plus prejudice. Sorry, yeah, power and prejudice. That's why, in their mind, black people can't be racist, right? Because, first off, it's not enough just to be prejudiced. You have to have power. And they then boil that down to either having political power and or economic power, right? So even if a black person has political power and he is prejudiced, it doesn't mean that they can be racist in that sort of thinking because the white person might still have economic power. That's the whole point that they're trying to make there.
You see,
Yeah.
you've gone
Yeah,
maybe like what? Well, let me just check here. We're 8 minutes in, and I'm already confused.
exactly. See, this is why I drink. This is why I drink when I read these things. So, and oh, wait, let me.
Okay, wait. It's because I
Hmm.
really want to understand this. I might be
Mm-hmm.
poking fun, but that's the comedian in me that's poking fun. I actually really, as like you, really want to understand where it is they're coming from. You know,
Yeah,
so let's just dissect this a little bit, okay? So they think this is what I understand. They've redefined racism, which it's like, how do you even redefine a word? I mean, words develop
that's
in society. The word bread has always meant bread. Who are the people that come about and say, okay, we're not going to call bread bread anymore. We're going to call it bready. Like now, bready is the term. So,
well,
is there like a type of authority that does that? Is it like Oxford? Is it what? Who does
not
that?
no, not really. It's society as a whole that decides how words evolve and develop over time, right? So words can shift meaning um, from one generation to another generation, but usually it's a very gradual shift.
So,
Okay,
in other words,
so what they've
society
actually
society agrees to the definition. In other words, so if I say from now,
yes,
I'm going to call bread bready, and then that catches on. At some point, generation by generation, bready just becomes the thing.
the norm. Yeah, yeah. It just becomes that norm.
That's
So
kind of the
society
scary
dictates
part.
that to some extent. Yes, which is why they target that, right? So they target the definitions because they know if they grill it in enough, eventually more and more people will accept their terms and their definitions, and then eventually the definition of the word will change, which is always why I point to people and say to them, go and look at your Oxford Dictionary, your Merriam-Webster, and even your advanced English dictionaries. Use the words in those contexts, because sometimes it's good for the word to evolve, but I found in the majority of the time, when the left dictates what a definition of the word is, it's to further an ideal or a political agenda of some sort. So that's one thing.
Let me put myself here. Okay, so I've just Googled Oxford definition of racism. Now, I'm going to say why I did this because I've had someone on my channel. But you should actually, you guys, I would actually love to see you guys have a conversation. Dr. Harley, I'm sure you've heard of her. So
Yeah.
she's come on my channel to say that guys like Oxford and these institutions are becoming very lefty in the way they think. And so when it becomes like she was studying philosophy, she got out of it, and this is all you can find this all on my channel. My interview with her, I think we called it a critique of critical theory. The when she was studying that, the I don't know what you call them, the higher ups, if I can put it that way, would decide what papers go through and what don't. You know, what studies go through and what don't. And that's a scary thought because you're kind of dictating what goes out into the world and what doesn't, you know, especially when something goes against the narrative that they want to put out. So it so for example, let's look at racism. Already I'm seeing, in my opinion, maybe a little bit of a problem. It was first defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, second edition in 1989, the year I was born. The theory that distinctive human characteristics and abilities are determined by race. The same dictionary term racism, a synonym of racialism, brief in the superiority of a particular race, belief in the superiority of a particular race. So that's the Oxford definition, and I'm seeing words that are kind of like the theory that, those kind of things. I don't know if that's normal definition talk,
Well,
but yeah.
more or less, the reason why they put theory there is because they're pointing at a another theory that I also picked up, or what I commented on as I'm reading through this book, and the things that I shared on Twitter and stuff. I said reference social Darwinism and stuff like that. So if you reference social Darwinism, that's basically where they tie that theory idea into, because that was the theory what they mentioned right there, that some people are superior or have superior abilities, whether it's cognitive abilities or physical abilities or all of those abilities, based on their race. You see this also in, like, you and I talked about this before we went online. The one book that I read, Mein Kampf, you see that ingrained in Hitler's thoughts as well, that he believed that the German race, right, was superior and was, an Aryan race to, let's say, the Jews. So there's that sort of idea, and it's sort of not sort of it is debunked, because no race is superior to another race. It depends from individual to individual. That's why we said race is just a load of shit. It's bullshit. Throw it out of the window. So yeah.
Well,
But they do rely on that definition
well,
really
that's
a lot.
yeah, that's the thing. So that's what I'm trying to understand, right? So their definition is you have racism comes from a place of power. So if you have power
And
and superiority, and
yeah, that's
you
the power part. Yeah.
yeah, so okay, so superiority is the power part.
Yes. So superiority in the sense of either having political superiority over those that would not have, or economic superiority. So you are overrepresented in a specific economic sector, or within the economy in and of itself. It's really not set in that. I have to also say this. It's not set in that tone as well. It's alluded to. in the book that I'm reading.
So it's worded in a way. Okay, I get you. All right.
Yeah, that you can see more or less what they're trying to say, because
Yeah,
they're
but
very,
also
very sneaky.
Yeah, but you see, that's also the other thing that they do, right? They make it vague so that they can have another like angle at it later if they get in trouble. Like it's like, no, but
Yeah.
what I meant was, I've seen that in arguments. Okay, so I think it's just hard for me to fathom this definition of power and stuff like that because I've seen racism. All right, I've experienced it. And I can tell you one thing: the person that was being a racist towards me didn't come from a place of power or superiority. That I can tell you 100%, not no doubt. And I'm not even talking about my recent experience with it. I'm talking about in the past.
Yeah.
And so that whole conversation to me, or that whole definition, just doesn't make any sense to me. And this whole idea, and I'm going to say something that might piss off a lot of people right now, but if you have a word that's race that's sorry, if you have the word in the English dictionary racist, right? That's a word. All right. The word racist, you can't now start saying, yeah, okay, well, some people are racist and some people aren't. This applies to some people and some, because that in itself is racist.
But you see, now this is also where they're very sneaky. They say, okay, fine, you can have that point, but racism just doesn't apply to a single individual either. See, now they also go into that and they extend it to the system. This is where the term systemic racism comes into. They also rely on that to try and defend their position on white privilege, right? So they'll say that, yeah, well, there's no laws and stuff like that. It's harder for some people to get into universities or colleges or jobs or whatever the case may be because they're people of color or whatever the case may be. And really, this is a question of, one, why is it specifically hard? There has to be underlying conditions. It doesn't necessarily have to do with their race, right? It can be done, it can be challenged that maybe it's culture, maybe it's merits, which is most likely in places like the United States, for example, where these overall studies that I've found and these writings that I found have been done. They always reference the United States, or even Canada in some cases. But honestly, for me, it's a load of. I'm going to be very straight. It's a load of bullshit. And here's my advice to anyone that's going to engage in a debate on this topic, which is also why I got frustrated with Ronaldo, is there is no such thing as neutral ground in a debate. That's point number one. Always assume that there is no neutral ground. You can be civil, you can be polite, but there is no neutrality, right? And this is what I feel like Ronaldo did wrong in his discussion. He tried to be very neutral to the topic. You can't be. You have to put your points forward and you have to stand by them unless or until they are proven to be insufficient. That's my view of it, at least. So yeah, the next thing that they also say is, okay, so because they've redefined racism, to not only apply to the individual and not only the root like definition of it, they also say whiteness is invisible to the white person, right? And what they mean by that is they say white people see whiteness as normal. Now I have to ask the question, what is normal in a society? To me, that would be that behavior or appearance, or whatever the case may be, which occurs the most in society, which is also acceptable. So that's how I would define normal, right? Obviously, the dictionary would have a better definition than I have, but I digress. That's what I would see as normal.
Well,
so in a white or in a majority white country like America or Canada, the overall culture will be seen as that of a white person, whatever that may be. Whether that's a French culture or a European culture or other European culture. or even here in South Africa in some smaller suburbs, for example. Yeah. But you wanted to say?
Yeah, no, you kind of said what I wanted to say. Like it's normal is subjective.
Yeah.
Normal is very subjective, depending on where you live, what country you stay in, the economic
Yeah.
situation, the demographics, everything, the culture itself makes certain things normal. You know, what is normal in South
Yeah.
Africa may not be normal in Egypt. What is normal in Egypt may not be normal in even Saudi Arabia. What is normal there may not be normal in Russia. The list can go on and on and on and on and on. So normal is subjective, and even if you're just talking about white, right? So this is something that when you said that, like it popped into my mind. Like when you said that, yeah. So white people don't see white or recognize their whiteness because they're white, or whatever term you used. Um, it's funny that they accept that. They're willing
Mm.
to accept that white people don't see white, but they won't accept that anybody else doesn't see color. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't see, and I've said this before on my show. Racism is a big problem in South Africa, not because there. I wouldn't say, like, I'm not saying that there isn't any racism. I'm sure there's been people even I've experienced it here. But what I'm trying to say is, when I came to Egypt, I was about 18 going on 19. The like the I never saw color, and that's the only way I know how to explain it. Because in Egypt,
Mm.
there wasn't what is happening here in South Africa. This whole drive to make things about white and black and all that stuff. And trust me, there's black people in Egypt. Like,
Yeah.
there was none of that. That didn't exist. And now when I come into a new country and I notice this, it's in the air, in the atmosphere, and it's all about like, and then I took history, obviously, and it's all about like apartheid and blah, blah, blah. And that's where some people say it stemmed from, and I just noticed over the years living here, like it gets intense, really, really intense, and you try and avoid it. But when you try and avoid it, it kind of not sucks. It's the wrong term I'm using now, but it's almost like I want to say like I don't see color, guys. Like I don't. And then these woke folk want to say, yeah,
Yeah.
but that's racist. That's racist to say that you
Yeah.
don't see color. Which is
Yes.
but it's not what I mean. Their definition of that sentence is not what I mean. What I mean is I see a human being in front of me. And it doesn't matter what you believe in, what your ideologies are, whether you're a homosexual, a part of the LGBTQ plus community, whether you're a Christian, an atheist, a whatever, it doesn't matter because I see a human
Yeah.
being and I treat those how I want to be
Yes.
treated. That's it. That's where it
Yeah.
is.
See, you and I can say that, for example, we treat the individual as that individual,
Yes.
not necessarily as their group or whatever the case may be. Um, and that's I think a very important distinction also, between us. Let's put it in a dualistic sense for a moment here, just for simplicity's sake. So that's the difference between us and them, then, right? Because I hate doing that, but that's how I see it. I see it like people like you, myself, and other individuals like what you also that you also know, and that extends way beyond. That's also probably, like, I would believe, the majority of South Africa deals with each other as individuals instead of just the group. There's a very, very small handful of people that would still handle you like that group, right? It doesn't take long for you know um, young people and people in general, really, to, once they get out of their comfort zones, out of their cultural comfort zones, out of their suburbs or small towns, or things like that, and they're exposed to like a city like Johannesburg or Pretoria or Durban and so on, where there's a mix of cultures, to be shocked and sit and see, actually, well, actually the world is more complex than just, well, there are the Indians, there are the coloreds, there are the whites, there are the blacks. That you start to pick up, even in those groups, there's distinct cultures in those groups, and even then, every individual differs somewhat to every other individual. So you can't just base your judgment on the cover of the book. Basically, you have to read the book. If you get my metaphor.
Yes.
So yeah, that's another thing that they try to avoid. But I've said dualistic. What I've also picked up in some of the reading that I've done is they use, can I say this? They use a lot of religious-esque terms. One of these terms is dualism, right? For me, dualism is a religious-like term because it's a mind over matter or a matter over mind sort of, connotation.
Like a yin and a yang type
And it
thing?
Yes,
Good and
something like
evil?
that, right? So it's a dualism sort of idea here. And they try and set this up. And the more I read through this, the more it does seem cultish, the more it does seem like a religious cult of some sort. I know I said I'm going to be neutral, but here I can't be neutral because I'm very, very sensitive to the words that people use. I think a lot of people are subconsciously aware of, the dangers of the language that's used. But when they said, for example, there's a false dualism of whiteness and other, for example, they love doing that. Um, they want to somehow, how can I, because it's also very confusing to me. I can't, they're trying to say that it's a false dualism, but then they go and prove the false dualism, the false dualism in their book, if you get my meaning, right? So they say, no, there's a false dualism of whites versus people of color. But then they proceed to prove this through their own work, right? So for you and me, for example, we'll agree and we'll say, no, that is a false dualist sort of view because people are people, individuals are individuals, and you have to judge individuals based on that individual. Where they will go and say, no, there's whiteness and there's people of color, and there's only that, only that. So I'm really, really cautious with it, with what they say. Now imagine coming out of like matric or grade 12, you're going to a university or college or a technicon or wherever it is you're going to study, right? And it's mandatory to study diversity classes or whatever the case may be. And a book like that is plonked down on your desk.
Mm-hmm.
And you are forced to read that. Now, if you're 18, 17, 18, 19 years old, how much exposure to the world did you really have?
Not a lot.
So you're going to take them on their word, the writers and the author, the writers and the reviewers and the teacher that's going to teach you, you're going to take them on their word on this. And that's what worries me, because there's like a lot of false history in this book as well. And I'll touch on that as well. Yeah, they also try to make it seem like it's capitalist sort of ideas that are white. And the reason I say this is they take you back to the medieval times, right? In this book. And they tell you, okay, so medieval society was structured as this. So you've got the aristocracy and the church, and you've got the serfs and the peasants at the bottom, right? And it was the aristocracy and the church that decided what was good and right, and the peasants and the serfs just accepted it as God's will. Fine. Don't agree entirely with that, but can't really fault them on that either, because it's a really good short description of what the system was.
Mm.
Then they skip probably 400 years somewhere between the 15th and the 17th century, or 13th and 17th century, thereabout. They skip about 400 years. And they'd say, well, and then capitalism started. So they skipped colonialization, they skipped imperialism, they skipped like protectionist sort of ideas, which led to imperialism and colonialism. They skipped all of that, and they say capitalism. So you can already see like, there's like a Marxist sort of thing here. Yeah. And another thing that they try to redefine was, what was it? It wasn't anthropology, it was some other term as well. What was it? Cultural materialism. Yes, cultural materialism. Now, cultural materialism is the idea from Karl Marx, not really from Karl Marx, but you can credit him for it, where a society's culture developed along the lines of its infrastructure.
Mm. I've heard that one before.
So there, yes. So it's not really like that. It's more complex for me because I say that, as long as culture develops, the infrastructure will develop to support that culture and vice versa, right? And what they try to do is they try to say, well, because of that, uh, people of color have been left behind in infrastructure development, which to me is something really strange. In South Africa, that might still be true, but is it really then because of white privilege? Or is it because of a culture? And when I say culture, I'm not pointing at a specific culture like a Zulu culture or a Xhosa culture or anything like that. I'm talking about a workman's culture, like, for example, corruption or anti-corruption, uh, fraud, things like that, because that can also be part of a culture, not necessarily, a hereditary culture, but a culture of the individual, as an example. I don't know. What are your thoughts so far?
I'm just I'm very like I'm interested. I'm curious about a few things. So the I want to go back to the history part of it. Okay, so the
Mm,
medieval thing. So as far as I understand it, let's try and while we bring this up, also correct as much as we can. So I know that capitalism started like it from what I understand, it grew from it took years to evolve into what it is even today. It's not like
mm.
someone just planted a book and said, "Boom, here's my idea. Let's do this." It took
Actually,
it took centuries, if not more, to because it started with trade. That's the thing. The trade route and all that stuff back in the like we're talking about like the spice days here. Um, like
mm,
all that stuff, people were trading. That's what they started with. There wasn't really currency. That was the
yeah,
currency was trading. I want a spice, so you must give me something in return for the spice. You know, um, and
mm,
that was the first, as far as I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, indication of capitalism because it's trading, it's
mm,
free market type of thing. And that over the years evolved into what we know capitalism as today. Because I think when colonialism started as well, they gave farmers had to now bring people into work, but they wanted pay. So that whole structure started there. Eventually, just trading wasn't enough for the everyday man,
mm,
as society and everyone started to evolve and
mm.
grow. So that's in a nutshell, as far as I understand it, where capitalism came from. And you make it sound like year 1930, someone came out and went like, "That's capitalism. Let's do it now."
Ah,
Is that how they
well,
make it sound?
like you said, yes, that's how they make it sound. Like, there's no transitional period. So, for example, in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, which eventually led to colonialism, was this idea of what we would call mercantilism, right? So it's a form of protectionism, and the idea of that is, if I can loosely sum it up, is the people thought that a country is only as rich as the amount of resources and wealth,
Mm.
that it possessed. So that would include the gold that the traders had and the, I don't know, the things that they traded had as well. So that would include your wheats and your breads and your nuts and your bolts and all of that. And then along came a gentleman, Adam Smith, in the mid 1700s, 1750 something, 52, somewhere about there. And he wrote the book, um, On the Wealth of Nations. Yes. And that we can really say was sort of the introduction to capitalism, to the free market, because in there he discussed like the division of labor,
Mm.
you know. So all of a sudden you can, lower tariffs on this side because that would free labor in the country, let's say, for example, in England, it was like the farmers,
Mm.
potato farmers or wheat farmers, I can't remember which, but they imported from America and Ireland a lot of wheat or potatoes or something, and all of a sudden there was like not enough profit for the English farmers. So they moved to the cities, which was beginning to industrialize. So they started to, can I say, specialize in different fields. And the division of labor basically made it possible for capitalism at that stage to introduce itself as a whole system. So, yeah, but it didn't just start when he wrote the book, you're right. So it was gradually implemented slowly over the course of history until at some point there was a bust, and we now have kinds, like what we currently have,
Yeah, but
government
even
interfering into the market and
yeah,
so on. But even that took transition.
yeah, and even
Yeah.
even now, I wouldn't say that we've hit like just like people who are on the left say, yeah, we want communism. It's never been done right. I think capitalism hasn't been done right. It's the
No, it
same.
hasn't.
It's the same problems that we have. I people say like, yeah, communism. You can't compare. You can't say communism has ever happened because it's never really been implemented, and that's why we need communism because capitalism isn't working. Well, here's the thing: capitalism isn't working because of the human factor. There's corruption, there's
Yep.
theft, there's all this other stuff. True capitalism has really also never been really implemented. And also, this is, and people again are going to probably get angry that I say this, but free market has never been implemented in South Africa. It wasn't implemented in the apartheid years. It wasn't implemented now.
No.
And before you say
No.
anything, I have to address this. Peter Sawanga has given a 100 Rand super chat. Thank you so much, buddy. Peter
Wow.
is a fellow comedian who is with me on the Funny You Should Say That show and just did a roast
I've seen him,
earlier.
yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. He has a question for you, Dodgy. He's asking Dodgy Idealist, any relation to the Artful Dodger?
No.
Yeah, that's just Peter being funny.
No.
But thank you, Peter, so much for the super
Let me
chats. Greatly
distance
appreciated.
myself.
And he's saying insightful conversation, gents. Thank you so much, Peter, for watching.
Thank you.
All right, so okay, so we tackled the history part.
Yeah.
What was the next part after that?
So, okay, before we move on, I also want to just make sure people understand that capitalism can only be ever done in the private sector, right? And so far, as long as the government interferes with that, that diminishes the private sector. So think of it as a sort of pyramid, right, with a base. So the more government influences the private sector, which is the base of the pyramid, the less of a base there is to support this entire pyramid structure, right? Another example of this is, let's say, or let's make it a biblical one, is the Tower of Babel, for example. Perfect example of that. Where a government becomes so overreaching that the one side of it doesn't understand what the other side does, and the whole system basically collapsed. That's what's going to happen under communism. That's basically what happened in China, and they corrected it before it basically hit the floor, and they created economic zones.
Yes.
So some parts of China are free to trade, other parts of China are not free to trade. It still falls heavily under the communist regime. They
And
also
let's
tried to.
touch on that very quickly because that is something I found out recently, right? Technically, capitalism, that little free market zone, has helped China, saved China, right? But
Yes.
nobody really knows about them because of the terminology that they use. The what do you call it now?
Yeah.
The free
The
zone.
free market, or the economic, the special economic zones, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
It's basically
It's
where
a
government has very, very, very little interference into that. Very little government regulation actually applies in those economic zones. Yes, it's the special economic zones or something like that. But it's
Yes.
economic. It's centered around key cities,
Yes.
right, where trade might be very, how can I say, stimulated. But regardless, let's get back on the point. So they skipped over that entire part. They redefined cultural materialism, not cultural Marxism. See where my thoughts are going already with that. But so yeah, they even use examples, and they've what I'm going to tease Bianca here because she and I disagreed on the terminology of what was it? An anecdote. So they use unfalsifiable anecdotes. Yes.
Please define
To try
anecdote
and
because I've
prove
heard
their
a lot of woke people use that term. Like they keep on saying, "Oh, he's using anecdotes. He's using anecdote." What is an anecdote?
An anecdote is a short report of something or of some event that happened which involves an individual or a group of individuals. So it can be true, it can be false.
Use an example.
It's either well, an example is, oh, yesterday at the supermarket I saw an auntie pushing her trolley. Can you prove that? Can you disprove it? No, you can't. So that's basically what an anecdote is, right?
So a lie.
But usually if you can, not really a lie, it's an unprovable sort of thing,
Okay.
you know.
All right.
Yeah, it's an unprovable provable story, which is also why certain countries have laws that prevent you from using anecdotes as evidence, right? I know in South Africa, like, thank you, D. Martin, you pointed this out. In South Africa, anecdotes is not really kept out of the court of law, but there are certain conditions that it has to meet, as to meet, sorry, in order to be considered as the back of evidence into the back of evidence.
Interesting.
You have to be able, for example, to corroborate the anecdote, which is one example that I've seen. So that's very interesting. So they use that. That's why I say they throw out unfalsifiable anecdotes, right? But when you read these things, you tend to wonder, could this not be like culture, right? So one example that I've also shared was where a woman complimented a Mexican man, and she said to the man, "You know what? You wouldn't say that you're really Mexican. I would have been mistaken to think that you were a Spanish person, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I would probably take offense to that. Maybe if I'm really touchy, as a touchy individual and very proud of my culture. But it's not because she's white. It's because she saw some form of mannerism that she also knows is evidence in the Spanish culture. So again, yes, while the man might be Mexican, he, even in that Mexican culture, has his own individual culture that he, prefers, his own mannerisms that he does. So again, it's more to do with cultural witness as opposed to like racism or whiteness, in my honest opinion. Another example that I, for example, used was like I had these really awful friends in high school. I have to admit that. So
You had really awful friends in
but
high school. Okay.
I had really awful friends
Why
in
were
high
you
school.
friends with them?
I'm still an awful person, but
Dodgy.
but the, but there were like these two Afrikaans dudes. I'll never forget this. And like my other two friends were like calling them Dutchmen, and these two Afrikaans dudes were getting really angry, right? Okay, suffice to say, we got our ass handed to us. That's why I love Afrikaners. They're quick and resourceful. So, but afterwards, we were great chummies, and like I asked them, so why did you get angry with being called Dutchmen? And they said, because we're not. We're Afrikaners. So if it was a thing of whiteness, then they wouldn't have gotten angry because Dutch are normally white and Afrikaners are normally white. So what's the issue? So it can't be race, right? And then again, not all Dutchmen are white, and not all Afrikaners are white either. Just putting that out there. I'm just
No, you're
trying to simplify the argument.
100% right. I mean, anybody who watches the cultural discussion that I've been having with Mikhail Kanaka on Afrikaans culture, he often says, being Afrikaans does not mean you're white. That is
No,
a political construct that was created because
yeah,
there are a lot of people of color that identify as an Afrikaner. Ema
yeah.
Adams.
So this brings me then to an important sort of question then. What defines a culture, right? Oh, again. So for me, what defines a culture is not the race of the person, but there has to be a common language. That's the first thing, because you have to be able to communicate with people in your own culture, right? then there has to be some form of a geographical area which you identify with. You don't necessarily have to live in that area, but you have to identify with that area, right? So that can be like a town, it can be a country, it can be anywhere in the world, as long as you can identify with that, speck of dirt somewhere.
Well,
It
here's
doesn't even have to be dirt.
again, like you said at the beginning of the show, let's use proper definitions. So, the
Yes,
Oxford
go for it.
culture, the word culture in the Oxford Dictionary means the way of life of people, including their attitudes, values, beliefs, arts, sciences, modes of perception, and habits of thought and activity. Cultural features of forms of life are
Yep.
learned, but are often too pervasive to be readily noticed from within. There you go. And
Hmm.
that's the Oxford definition,
That's
which is basically
basically
what you said.
bang on.
Yeah,
That's bang on. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's bang on, and I agree with that. And so for me, it's a lot of the stories and the things that they point out is to do with different perceptions on culture instead of straightforward racism or white privilege. So that's the issue I have with that. Ugh. Like I said, you have to be drunk to actually try and make sense of a lot of these things. But as I'm getting drunker and as I'm going through these books, sometimes I find myself being much more straightforward than I should be. So
Do you know anything about the authors that wrote these books? And I'll get to the point with this question because it's a simple yes or no question. Any authors
well,
of these books, were they of color?
one
And how many books have you
one
read
was of
or been
color.
told to read?
I've been told, well, Bianca gave me three, right? But like I said, I couldn't read. I found like two out of the three books that she recommended. But none of these that I could find was a real sort of introduction to the idea of white privilege. I needed an introduction, and this is where I got this book from. So one of these writers are a person of color, if you want to call them that. I think it's an Indian lady, and the other two ladies are white, right? And right in the beginning of the book, they they said, they have to. Jesus, this is so condescending, but they have to give credit, to all the people that supported them and so on. And they know that if it wasn't for their white privilege, then this book would not have been as legitimate as it otherwise would have been. And I'm thinking to myself, dear God, why? Like, it's not like it's legitimate now. So maybe because they're white, this book is not legitimate. I don't know. I'm starting to think in that line, and I know it's wrong, but no, I'm joking. I'll never think in that line. But it's yeah. Like what you're doing now, what you're doing now.
You do it like 20 times a day now. Oh, man. Oh, it's
So
virtue
so
signaling,
when I
isn't
know
it? I mean, in the that's what they did. That's what
and
they did
you
in
see
that.
that's also yeah, and this is sort of what I think Ronaldo also wanted to point out to Bianca, right? So it's this sort of thing that doesn't add to the actual discussion, which is another reason why I got so pissed off with with how they handled, their sort of mini debate, because they didn't get to that point. It was a I tried to watch the whole thing. I really did. Halfway through, I just said, I can't.
Okay, well, I'm gonna
I can't
stop
anymore.
you. I'm gonna stop you right there because here's the thing.
Yes.
You told me, and just on the principle, I don't want you to comment any further
Yeah.
about that debate because this whole discussion is based on the principle that we need to get educated, as they would say, before we can have an
Yes.
opinion. So, because you haven't watched the
Yeah.
entire thing, I have, and painful. But yeah, there was no
Yeah.
real, I don't know, conclusion, if I can
No.
put it that
Yeah.
way.
Yes.
So let's try and steer away from that conversation just in case, because again, I don't want you to say anything wrong because you haven't watched the full thing.
No,
Um,
what I wanted to say is, I don't know what the conclusion was or whether or not there was one, but it got irritating because it felt like, both were talking past one another in my view. Like they couldn't get into a sort of agreement of, okay, let's stop here and let's move on. I might be wrong, and that's fine. I still need to go and watch that, and maybe I should if I can sit through it. But
just start from
yes,
the
it
point
was,
you
and
you ended. Don't watch it from the beginning again.
yeah, and yeah, no, I know where I ended it, so I'll definitely do that. But yeah, and really, it's like this book as well, right? So they start with something, and they just stop abruptly with it. There's no conclusion, towards that, and then they move on to another topic. And what I realized with these sort of conversations, and that's also what I want to point at, is the way this book is structured, right? So if let's say I rely on a definition of a word to create a foundation of white privilege, I'm going to make sure that in my first chapter, the introduction to that first chapter is how I would define that word, right? That's the first thing that I'm really, really worried about with these works, because they don't do that. They give you like 3 sub chapters before they actually get to like what is race. And then they go 3 more chapters, and then what is racism? And they go 3 more chapters, and they define whatever it is they need to define. So that's another thing. And here's the most irritating part of it. They they insist, like they insist that whiteness is mentioned continuously throughout each and every chapter and subchapter.
How
Like every
often?
second paragraph,
Oh wow, every second paragraph.
they make sure to put that in. It's either to do with you have to perceive this in this manner, in this dualistic manner that we have said is false, but we're now saying it's true, right? That's one. And then, but remember, this thing of the woman that noticed this from the Mexican man, it's because she didn't see her whiteness and so on and so forth. So they really do push you to that inference. They don't prove that inference, they just push you to that. So that's a real gripe that I have with this. It's like, yeah, but if it's evidence-based, you don't need to push me to that, right? I can draw from the evidence that you provide that this is because of white privilege, or this is because of whiteness, or this is because I am somehow blind to my whiteness. But all you're doing is you're pushing me into that direction, and I don't want to go in that direction because I can see other issues that it could be. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm just going to get to the comments very quickly. Unati, I never know how to pronounce his last name, but Unati is here.
I just
Yeah. Robin's saying we love straightforward, so be straightforward. Peter asking a question: A White Fragility, the book. Anyone here read that book? Actually, that is on our reading list, Peter. So I will be reading that pretty soon. And then,
yeah.
what advice? What would you advise someone being challenged to admit their white privilege? That's a
Don't
heavy.
admit it. Like, don't admit it. That's the advice. See, here's where my advice earlier comes into again. If you're going to enter into a debate with these people, first and foremost, do not think that there is neutral ground. You can be polite, like, I don't care, or you can be as rude as possible. I really couldn't care less, but there is no neutral ground. Don't think that there is neutral ground. Stick to the classical definition of racism. If they go with, yeah, but race is, see, I even call it now rice, but race is power plus prejudice, you go, okay, but define power. And if they define power as, political and economic, then go and point out that, maybe it's not really that. Maybe it's the definition, and point them back to the classical definition. And if they don't agree with it, hammer on it. Because the moment that you concede on that point, you've lost.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good, yeah, because they will try and redefine. I mean, that's what they've basically done. They've taken the word racism
Yeah.
and extended it to the point where it's now getting confusing, and they twist it. So now you have all these. Pierre Duplessis just giving a 70 Rand super chat. Thank you so much, Pierre, for the 70 Rand super chat, saying super interesting. Thanks, Joe and Dodgy. You're welcome. And again, for those of you who are just tuning in, we want to know, we want to understand. Not necessarily agree, but we want to understand where this side is coming from, and it's very confusing. I'm actually getting a headache, to be honest with you. So I can only imagine what you're going through. Because that's the thing. Like, I genuinely want to understand because my wife is white.
Yeah.
And she gets the amount of crap she has to deal with sometimes from people of these woke types is outstandingly disgusting. And I'm not going to go into detail. I'm not. But I find hypocrisy in what they put out. A lot of it. No, you must recognize your white privilege and that you're this whatever, I don't know, to for lack of a better word, they make it sound like the white people are this evil race and have been given everything, and and that's the thing. There are some white people in this world that haven't gotten everything, that haven't experienced these things like what some people say, like, yeah, but if a white person is just driving, like in America, I know that's one of the definitions is if a white person is driving, they're not going to get pulled over, but if they do get pulled over, they experience the interaction with the cop differently than a person of color would. There's that. But then, like you said, there's so many other things though that can contribute to that difference of interaction. And it ranges from cultural differences to just the way the person was raised. And maybe I'm being a bit naive and a bit optimistic, but I would like to think that in the year 2020, how are we still discussing this? How are we still,
Precisely.
people are still trying to find problems where there aren't any? Is it because we've discovered every inch of this earth and now we're bored? What is it that contributes to this kind of behavior where now we have to? Because here's the thing, and I'm going to call it as it is. Hitler said some of the shit that we're hearing. All right?
Yeah.
And you've been
definitely.
you've read that book as well, so you would know. And if you compare some of his writings to what the woke are saying, it is scary. And yet, for some reason, they've made us feel, or when I say us, they've made the white people feel what's it called? Subconscious or guilty. They've made them feel guilty for existing. And guess what? Hitler did the same thing to the Jews, sort of. But continuously bashed them and said that they're an evil race, and said that they're and yet we seem to have forgotten that part of history. And yet people, because, I don't know, maybe they're trying to make the whites sound like this huge empire that ruled the earth for so many years, and now all the other people of color, it's time to take back our whatever and land and bullshit that they keep on talking about. Meanwhile, we as a species should have moved past this years ago. You people are creating problems where there doesn't need to be one, because let me tell you something, the problems are not because of races, it's because of bad people, regardless of the color of skin.
There we go. That's brilliantly stated. And I want to touch on that part as well, when you said like what Hitler basically said and what they basically say are well, one and the same thing. So when you read Mein Kampf, for example, as horrible as that is, Hitler pointed out two social issues, the same social issues that we currently experience, right? So he's asking, but why are Germans being excluded from universities and and other tertiary education, and functional jobs like your farmer's hands, or in factories like your precisely it does, right? Currently, like the Put South Africans First movement, but I didn't say that out loud. You do with that what you want. But it's exactly that sort of mentality, right? And he concluded, well, it's the Jews. It's the Jews and the non-Germans, because remember, he didn't only target the Jews, right? He also targeted what he would consider non-Germans.
Yes, that's true.
So, and this is something that I also want to point at. Discrimination can happen to anyone, irrespective of ethnicity, right? Everyone somewhere somehow experienced discrimination at some point in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
We can't deny that. And we have to guard against, policies and things like that, and even thoughts like that, for example, like this white privilege, because this is, in essence, a discriminatory sort of mindset. And we have to guard against that. That is why I'm not in agreement with people that say white privilege exists, because no, it doesn't. Discrimination exists, yes, in some form or other, but no, not white privilege. I'm sorry. Because I can't see it in China and India and Japan and Korea and both North and South. I can't see it in other parts of Africa.
It wasn't in Egypt.
Sorry.
I'll tell you that wasn't in Egypt. That's for sure.
So there we go. So sorry. And these studies are all concentrated on America and Canada. So no.
Where the population of whites are the majority.
Yes.
You see, this is the
so that brings in another question.
Yeah, but that's the thing. This is the stuff that they don't realize, and the thing that irritates me the most, because I believe that if you're going to write about something, right, and I see the members that just joined. I'm very happy about that, but I just want to finish my point, and I'll address you just now. If you're going to write about something, and this is something that you and I said at the very beginning of the show before we went online, and we said it again, we don't want to make opinions on something that we haven't really read. So we are trying to be very careful. We're only quoting what we've already heard, and I will read the book. I want to read White Fragility. I really, really do. Okay. Having said that, though, what irritates me about that book isn't just the nonsense that I've heard that's in that book. If you're going to make a thesis or a study or whatever on a subject, right? And in this case, the white race or white privilege that a certain race experiences, right? And so basically this author is saying how certain people of color feel and react when a white person does something, okay? That's basically what I've heard in the book, and the certain quotes I've extracted and watched and stuff like that. The author is white. And that I feel is like, what? Like, how can you dictate for another race how they feel when a race does something? A race that you're not even a part of. So it's condescending. Because I'll give you an example, and I'm sure this one's a very popular one, and I know that a lot of people already say, like, yeah, but the White Fragility book isn't perfect. No book is perfect, clearly. But there's a line or there's a paragraph, and this was an article I read that was written by a black man, okay, in America, and he was saying, he extracted this part where he said that if this lady that wrote White Fragility said, if a white woman cries in front of a black person, that black person feels or is humiliated because of this experience, apparently because they relate it to their past of slavery and some crock of shit like that. And it's like, you're a white lady. You don't know what slavery was like for the black people, number one. Number two, how can you speak on behalf of black people like that? And even the guy that I was reading the article, he said that. He said, it feels so condescending for someone who's not part of my race, doesn't know where I've come from, doesn't know the history properly, clearly, um, tells me how I should feel about the way a white person reacts to me. That doesn't make any sense. So luckily there are people out there that are debunking this kind of crap. But again, I need to
Yeah.
read it. I need to fully understand it. I know that it's just an expert, or sorry, not an expert, an excerpt from the book, and I
Yeah.
need to read it completely. And I'll get to that. Now, very quickly, I want to address Peter Sawanga. You are the best, dude. You became a member. Thank you so much, Peter, for becoming a member. That really means a lot to me. Thank you for supporting the channel. You're awesome, man. And Unati also became a member. So thank you as well, buddy, for becoming a member to the channel. For those of you who don't know, you can become a member to the channel for as little as 10 Rand. So support my work, support what I'm doing. Thank you both so much for becoming new members. All right, so look, we've already gone over the hour. And is there more? Because if there's
There's,
more, then we'll
look,
do a part two.
there are a lot more that I can touch on, but I think I've touched base on like the foundation. And if I can give advice to anyone that wants to sort of start pushing against this idea, start reading the literature, but be very, very guarded on the manipulation tactics that they use. Make sure that you also know the history, or the more or less grab an idea or grasp an idea of the things that they try to manipulate, because they are very, very subtle to this. But the moment that you start to see through it, and the moment that you can see, like, well, this is where they're coming from, I feel that's the moment that you can properly address these arguments, no matter how they put it forward, because you know where they're coming from, you know what twists and turns they'll throw. And I really don't want to do a part two. Can we not do a part two, please? I just want to finish this book, critique it, put it in the back burner, and then move on to White Fragility and maybe finish that in a record time.
Well, I was actually going to ask if you would be willing, once you and I have both read White Fragility, to do a review on it.
We can do that. I'll be happy to do that. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. And yeah, let's try and be as neutral as possible as well. I know I said I'm going to be neutral, but look at where I'm at now. I've moved from neutral to hostile. So
Look, I think it's very difficult. Like I want to say it as well.
yeah,
Like people might be asking like, why, Joe, would you read it? You're not white or whatever, and blah blah blah. I don't. I'm very mixed. I'm a very mixed race. I'm an individual that has a lot of different culture, background, and stuff like that. But again, I feel that if I'm going to encounter someone who preaches about white privilege and all that stuff, I want to know how they think.
yeah,
And
that's the thing.
yeah, and I want to be able to say, okay, but like you said, now do the research, and I 100% agree with that. I mean, if there's something that I think is not right, I'm gonna go Google it quickly, or try and find any articles that can not necessarily disagree with it, but like just verify whether what they're saying is true or not. And that's very important. Question everything, and guys, those of you that are watching this right now, question us. I encourage it. Question us.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, anyway, as Peter, a good friend, always says, who's saying he wants to see more. Peter has always had this thing, I got questions, hashtag I got questions. And he questions everything. Venner, Weber, and I always question
But
everything.
that's good.
And I think that's a good way to live your life, really. I mean, you need to be open-minded and not trust what you read, especially when you read those books. So yeah, we'll catch up when we're done reading White Fragility, and we'll do a little bit of a review. I'll be honest, I'm not gonna be kind. I'm not gonna be kind.
No.
I'm not. I'm putting it out there. I'm going to speak what I think is truth. I'm going to make notes. I'm going to make sure that I am well equipped. I'm going to take excerpts out, and I'll be like, okay, this is why this is wrong or whatever, and blah blah blah. That's how I'm going to treat it.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you are welcome to be as neutral as possible. Maybe take a triple whiskey next time.
You won't believe it, right? But in this little small glass, I've already had a triple whiskey. So because I knew, no. But yeah, no, I think, you know, a form of critique is a form of love. A critique is a form of love, and you don't need to be kind to critique something. I believe that, or maybe let's say it. Let's try and do a white privilege sort of move here. Not being kind is sometimes a form of kindness. There we go. That's where I'm going to end it. I'm gonna confuse it just as much as they have, and yeah. Sometimes it's necessary not to be kind.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah,
You can still be polite and not be kind. We've seen that.
yeah.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, that's where we're going to end it there. Thank you guys so much for watching. All of you, if you enjoyed it, please give it a like. Please give it a share. Please, become a member if you want to support what I do. And don't forget that I have left links to the Dodgy Idealist Twitter account or Twitter page. So go give him a follow, and his YouTube channel where he does interviews as well. You won't see any faces. It's more like a podcast. So if you like podcasts, want to listen to it in the background, please go check it out. He did have me on the show as well, so that was a very interesting and fun conversation. So yeah, Dodgy, don't go anywhere as I sign off. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much. Thank you to everyone who gave super chats tonight. Peter Sawanga and Pierre Duplessis, thank you guys so much for your super chats, and thank you to my new members, Unati and Peter Sawanga. You guys are really awesome. We'll be back once we've read the White Fragility book. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you at the next one. Good night. Hey guys, so if you enjoyed the show, please consider giving it a like and a share. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you're new to my channel. And if you really enjoyed the content, feel free to join and become a member. Don't forget about my fight against cancel culture. That's in the link in the description below. Support my fight against cancel culture. Go to that link and all the information is there. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching.